we're going to say what Tu B'Shvat is and all those things, but, well, actually, let's start with that. First of all, what is Tu B'Shvat? What does Tu B'Shvat mean? 15th of Shvat, right. So I'm going to argue that there are 4 phases to the history and evolution of Tu B'Shvat. And the first one is Tu B'Shvat in the Mishnah. It's the time of Hillel and Shammai. It's essentially the time of Jesus, right? It's the beginnings of codifying, right, the oral Torah, right? And we have Tu B'Shvat as the new year for trees. Tu B'Shvat is basically Tu B'April, right? If we had it today, right, it would be Tu B'April, right? Because you're in an agrarian society, right, and you are tithing, right? You're taking offerings, right? You're taking offerings to the temple, and the question is, well, when do I do it from? Roughly speaking, why do we think Tu B'Shvat was on Tu B'Shvat and not some other date?
So it has to do with the tree, with their understanding of the tree cycle.
Shvat is essentially, right, it's January or February in Jerusalem and the Galilee, right? And it's, if you think of what's going on, like it is absolutely, like it always strikes me when I'm in Israel, it is just around that time. If you look really, really, really closely, there really are the first buds on the tree. And if you haven't seen the first buds on the tree, then within a week or so of Tu B'Shvat, you're like, right? So on the one hand, it's that time of year. And why the 15th of the month? Because it's the full moon, right? We don't have calendars and blackberries, right? It's the full moon. So Tu B'Shvat starts off, the first phase of it is it's the tax year. And so the Jewish people get exiled from the land of Israel, right? And suddenly, like, it's over, right? It makes no sense to celebrate this thing. It has lost its functional raison d'etre. Now, I want to just point out at this point that in this sense, it is also paradigmatic of the Jewish people. Because actually, never mind Tu B'Shvat should have gone out of history at that point. We should have gone out of history at that point. And actually, we didn't. And in a sense, what the rabbis of the Mishnah and the Talmud did is they did a sort of jujitsu on the tradition. And they said, you know what? God, instead of being present in one place, in the temple, is present everywhere. Instead of serving God through bringing a sacrifice, we will serve God through avodat halev, right? Through the service of the heart, through tefillah, through prayer. And Tu B'Shvat goes from being a real lived tax year to the memory of being a tax year because it's in the Mishnah and there to learn about. When's the second period in which Tu B'Shvat starts to renew itself in Jewish life? 1492, the Jews get expelled from Spain, and some of them end up back in the land of Israel. Some of the Kabbalists end up in Sfat. And the first record of a Tu B'Shvat Seder we have is a work called Prietz Hadar, which is essentially 16th century. It's the record of a Tu B'Shvat Seder. It's a Haggadah, in a sense, for Tu B'Shvat. And some of the things that we know of about Tu B'Shvat Seders in terms of doing 4 cups of wine and 4 worlds and that stuff traces back to this period. When's the third period of Tu B'Shvat in Jewish history? Yeah, Zionism. Right? The 19th century Zionists, many of them secular, start to go back to Israel. In the 20th century, they're founding kibbutzim and moshavim. And on the one hand, they were reinterpreting existing Jewish tradition, and Pesach had a particular kind of meaning. Shavuot, as the harvest festival, took on a great deal more sort of physical significance. But you could sort of see them saying, you know what, I'm not really religious in that traditional sense. I believe in returning to the land. What is quintessentially that element of the tradition that I want to really bring back to life? Oh, it's Tu B'Shvat. And I want to argue that the fourth period of Tu B'Shvat began in 1970. In 1970, you have Earth Day, right? I don't personally remember this, I was alive, but I mean, I've only read about it subsequently, but there was Earth Day in this country, and it was on the cover of Time magazine. And in the aftermath of this, as is the way of these things, a group of Jewish people started to get together and said, hang on a minute, what is our Earth Day? And some of them said, oh, Tu B'Shvat. And a group of rabbinical students at HUC, the Reform Rabbinical School, did a Tu B'Shvat Seder in the aftermath of Earth Day in 1971, I think. And I think that many of the modern Tu B'Shvat Seders date from then. For me personally, the first Tu B'Shvat Seder that I went to was in 1986 in in London, at the home of friends of mine, Bonner Haberman and Shmuel Browns. And and it was sort of fascinating to me. And the following year, I did my own Tu B'Shvat Seder in Golders Green, and I've hosted or been at a Tu B'Shvat Seder every year since. I was realizing that this year will be the 25th anniversary, as it were, of my first Tu B'Shvat Seder. And I think that Tu B'Shvat Seders, like living branches on a tree, are playing out in the Jewish world like that, right? Every year, I think there are more Tu B'Shvat Seders in the world and more people going to them. And having done a Tu B'Shvat Seder myself every year from 1987 to 2000, when I founded Hazon, we then started doing our own Tu B'Shvat Seder in New York. And then we started co-sponsoring them in other parts of the country. And then we did a Tu B'Shvat Haggadah. And this year, with support from the Jim Joseph Foundation, we're really expanding that. And we're going to be putting online, and I'm going to give you drafts of this in a minute, but we're going to be putting online a Tu B'Shvat Haggadah and a leader's guide. Godcast from Sarah Lefton are doing some cartoon units. There are probably going to be music clips that you can take down. There are 31 Moshe houses around the world, including in Moscow, in London, and elsewhere. And all of the Moshe houses are going to be doing Tu B'Shvat Seders with our Haggadah and Leader's Guide. Birthright Next are going to be using this in a variety of Birthright Next alumni groups around the country. And this year, it looks as if we're going to have like the largest series of interlinked Tu B'Shvat Seders in the history of the Jewish people, and we're kind of excited about that. And just as branches grow and there are twigs and then there are new trees, everybody in this room is invited to be part of this process. Not merely that we hope that you will be at a Tu B'Shvat Seder, but that we hope that you will think about hosting one and new people will come to your Seder and begin it again next year. Just want to hear from a few people. Tell us about where your Tu B'Shvat Seder was, what it was like, and one thing that was particularly good about it. And I want you to know, by the way, in a minute I'm going to ask for things that about your Tu B'Shvat Seders that weren't so good, because I want to discuss that too.
Last year was the first year I'd ever done a Tu B'Shvat Seder, and it could not have been possible without the materials provided by Hazon. It made it fabulous, so I just want to thank you. And it was an amazing experience because I'm personally connected to food, and there was a lot of food preparation and kind of cool foods there. And I think the one thing that stood out was everybody there had never been to a Tu B'Shvat Seder either, so we were all kind of celebrating this at the same time. Although I consider myself kind of steeped in celebrating what everybody Jewish celebrates, it's just sort of like being a virgin. I don't know. I don't know. Just this whole new thing. And realizing that this was something that wasn't just going to be a one-time deal.
So growing up in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and going to the conservative synagogue, which was the only show in town in Kalamazoo, Michigan, we did a Seder with the Hebrew school, and what I remember is the order, like Passover, the setting out things in a certain order and all the different fruits. We got to eat all the different fruits. And that was definitely what stood out. There was nothing else about it that I remember or could tell you, but that was, as a kid, that was very satisfying to just get to set things out and share all the different fruits.
Our CSA did a Tu B'Shvat Seder last year, and we assigned each person the 4 worlds. And, so we put it out there, and we didn't know what was going to come back. And what came back was Israeli dancing, tasting, smelling, music, all trying to engage all the senses. And the 4 people, did it separately, and then it came back, and it was really rich. And there was a whole component of people that came, elderly senior citizens from the shul who came and enjoyed that, along with CSA members. And so it was really, we kind of just put it out and didn't know what was coming back, and what came back was really surprising, and everyone was so, loved it. So it was great.
One of my first experiences, kind of full-blown experiences of sort of do-it-yourself Judaism, was designing a Tu B'Shvat Seder. And I remember, I was in Israel in 81 to 82, and we bought a copy of Pre-8 Sadar, and we studied it, and we designed one. But I don't remember if it was after that, but with the same people that I was studying with, we designed a Tu B'Shvat Seder based on educator, Sherry Kohler-Fox's mimeograph thing that she put together. Later on, when I met the person who became my wife, we realized that that was a connection for us because, first of all, the people that I did the Tu B'Shvat Seder with and composed it with were people that she knew, and that was sort of a hechsher for me being okay for her. But the other thing too was that she was at the Tu B'Shvat Seder that Sherry Kohler-Fox had designed and told me stories about, how that happened. And so it's become kind of a family tradition. One of the things that we've been doing together in making our house a Jewish home is doing a Tu B'Shvat Seder. We don't always do it, but it's become part of our family home.
Tu B'Shvat is the time of new beginnings, and Tu B'Shvat Seders are as well, and they're about fertility. And I should have said before that the first Tu B'Shvat Seder that I did in my home, there were two friends that I'd invited to my Seder. Bill was one of 4 boys, and Helen was one of 4 girls, and Bill was American, and Helen was English, and they met at my Tu B'Shvat Seder, and now they've got 4 kids of their own. Tu B'Shvat Seders are nice for things like that. As proud as we are of a series of institutional Seders, and those are growing, I strongly want to invite and encourage people to think about doing your own Tu B'Shvat Seder, right? That's the place where it's that place where I don't need to go and have somebody else do it for me. We're going to do it for a group of friends. Let me go on to, tell me things, those of you who've been to Tu B'Shvat Seders, things that didn't work, reasons that you didn't enjoy it, it wasn't quite right, if you can remember.
Too long. We got so carried away with finding sources and this is what happens when the mistakes that you make in doing do-it-yourself Judaism is that you make it way too long and you put in everything and people get bored.
Thank you. One of the things I totally wanted to say this morning is we have a tendency to cram everything in. And one of the things that often happens for me internally as we're planning our Tu B'Shvat Seders, people will come to me with like a draft of what we're doing, and guys, there is too much there. Adding more to it doesn't make it better. It just means that it's crammed and you don't necessarily have time to do it. And it's absolutely right. Part of a Tu B'Shvat Seder should just be fun. Part of it should be like eating and chatting with people. You shouldn't program the whole time, and you shouldn't chuck too much into it. Yeah?
It actually turned me off to have all these new fruits that were from all over the world, because in some ways I'm like, this is not really how it is. I mean, we've imported all of this, and I was at Chabad, and I loved being in that community, but it touched me in the way that I recognized the disconnection. Like, oh, okay, here's a star fruit from Costa Rica that I'm going to see when I go there the day after tomorrow. But the star fruit doesn't mean, it's not new to you in the way that I think fruit really can be new, or just the embrace of the holiday can be new. So the symbology of the holiday kind of lost the effect that it was intended to strike me with.
Thank you. So we're coming back to that, and we've got a text on that. I'm going to come back. Instead of responding directly to that now, I'm going to come back to that in a minute. What we've given out just now are 3 different things. The first of them is a little Tu B'Shvat Haggadah, right? An order for a Tu B'Shvat Seder. The second one is a leader's guide. And the third one is 5 texts. And these are drafts of things that are going to be online. Tu B'Shvat this year is I think it's Wednesday night, January the 19th. Look up for a second. Pedagogically, the first rule of a Tu B'Shvat Haggadah or anything else is don't give things out till you're ready for people to look at them and not listen to you. There is no such thing as an abstract Tu B'Shvat Seder, just as there is no such thing as an abstract Pesach Seder, right? There is a Pesach Seder for this particular group of people in this particular place. A Pesach Seder is really different if you've got a dozen 5-year-olds there than if you've got a dozen teenagers there. Right? It's different in different countries. It's different with different rhythms of grandparents. It's different institutionally. So one of the first things that I want to say is that one of the things that is so lovely about Tu B'Shvat, one of the things that makes it really exciting, is that if you think about a range of possible creativity with Jewish life, where on one side of the spectrum you've got Kol Nidrei night, and the other you've got Tuesday afternoon, right? Kol Nidre night, not so much creativity, probably, possible or appropriate there. Kol Nidre, we have a sense of what it is. We have a liturgy. We have nusach. Across the whole Jewish world, including a very wide denominational difference, Kol Nidre is actually pretty similar, right? Because it's there and it's fixed. And Tuesday afternoon, there's really nothing to hang it on. What is special about Tuesday afternoon? And Tu B'Shvat is the perfect middle for this, right? There is enough there that we have a lot to play with, right? It's the new year for the trees. There is history. There are materials. There's all kinds of stuff going on in the world on the one hand. And on the other hand, there is essentially nothing you have to do, right? We're not in the world of halacha here. You are not halachically obligated to eat or not eat a star fruit or anything else on Tu B'Shvat, right? Given that, if you're planning or organizing a Tu B'Shvat Seder, you have a lot of freedom to think about what it is you're trying to do. That includes not just what is the actual content of the Seder itself, but what stands behind that. Are we trying to introduce people to Jewish life? Are we trying to have a great time for I and my family? Are we trying to raise awareness of local CSAs or food systems in Albany or whatever it might be, right? It is worthwhile stepping back with whomever you are planning this and thinking, who do I want to have to my Tu B'Shvat Seder? And what do we want it to be like when they leave? Right? If I'm going to do it at a synagogue in Philly, are we going to do it as a synagogue Seder? Is this for families? Is it for families of young kids? Is it for new members? Is it to honor people who've been involved in the shul? Is it for, there are any number of subgroups of categories within the is it to bring people together across difference? Is it to inspire people Jewishly? Is it to open them up to something? Is it to raise issues? Is this an opportunity to do something interfaith? Right? We want to do our Tu B'Shvat Seder with the local church or mosque, right? There is a place to stand back before you dive in and say, who do I want to have at my Tu B'Shvat Seder, and what is it that I want to accomplish from it? There is a very primary framing that I use essentially in all of the Tu B'Shvat Seders that I do, and that is something that I learned from the late Reb Shlomo Carlebach. Reb Shlomo said, every Jewish holiday comes to remind us of something which ideally we should really be thinking about the whole year round. So the whole year round, I should be seeking to return to my best self. But if I forget, then that period of tshuva, the period from Rosh Chodesh Elul through Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the end of Sukkot, that period comes to remind me. The whole year round, I should be wanting to get rid of superfluity and stuff in my life and my home and my kitchen that I don't need. But if I forget, that period from Purim to Pesach comes to remind me to get rid of chametz in my life. And so the question is, what is it that Tu B'Shvat comes to remind us of that ideally we want to think about the whole year round? Right? And fundamentally, bless you, fundamentally what I think that Tu B'Shvat comes to remind us of in the new year for the trees, at the very beginnings of the growing cycle, right? True in Israel, true across Europe and North America, that our life is sustained by the physical world. That this quintessentially is a holiday to remind us that everything that we do, Wendell Berry says, you can measure the health of a society by the health of its soil. Right? As a suburban kid, it's only in the last few years, having read Wendell Berry, that I really understood what he means by that I've really started to get that. Right? And Tu B'Shvat is the holiday that comes to remind us every day of the year we are sustained by living systems. This is the holiday that comes to remind us of it. And so in a sense, now, this is hardly a narrow frame. Right? It's a huge frame. You can put anything you like into that. But I nevertheless think it's worth saying it like that because it helps us understand why we are here. It helps us understand, Hazon took as our theme quote, something else I heard from Reb Shlomo. He said, the Torah is a commentary on the world, and the world is a commentary on the Torah. And I think he meant at least three different things by that. I think he meant the Torah is a commentary on the physical world. Right? And that physical world and what's going on in it is a commentary on the Torah and Jewish tradition. Secondly, I think he meant the Torah, meaning Jewish thought, is a commentary on everything else, on the world, meaning Christianity and Buddhism and Western thought, and all of that is a commentary on Torah and Jewish tradition. And thirdly, The Torah is a commentary on our lives, and our lives are a commentary on the Torah. And so that too is a frame for Tu B'Shvat. So not only what is this holiday coming to remind us about our physical relationship with the world, but what is going on at the intersection of my life, my family, and my community, and the world around us that I want to tease out, right, at my Tu B'Shvat Seder. I just did the great session that Pablo and Esther did in here, and they were talking about like taking CSAs a step further. It was really a farmer's eye view of what a CSA is and how the interaction is with volunteers and communities from their perspective. If I live near them, I might have that be the theme of my Tu B'Shvat Seder, right? And I might have them come and be the guest speakers and teachers in the center of my Tu B'Shvat Seder. And upon the 4 cups and the fruits and stuff we haven't talked about yet, I would make that a central theme of it. We had, a few years ago, I'll tell you the story, we were doing a Tu B'Shvat Seder at the JCC in Manhattan, and there was a left-wing group called Jews Against the Occupation. And somehow or other, the leaders of the JCC had heard that Jews Against the Occupation were going to be protesting outside the JCC against the Tu B'Shvat Seder because it was, you know, Zionistic and supporting the land of Israel and stuff. And so people from the JCC phoned me up in a little bit of a panic about this. And I didn't know the Jews Against the Occupation people, but I knew some people who knew them. And I sent the following message to them. I said, guys, happily, this is a free society, and anybody is free to come and protest and do what you like in public space. I said, but we've got 2 guest speakers at the center of our Tu B'Shvat Seder this year. One of them is David Lehrer, who is the director of the Aravat Institute for Environmental Studies in Israel, and he's going to be talking about some of their work. And the other is Dima Halawani, who is a frum Muslim Palestinian who wears a hijab. And she's speaking at our Tu B'Shvat Seder as well, because she's part of the Aravat Institute, and she's talking about some of the stuff that's going on and parallel things in relationship to land between Israelis and Palestinians. I said, listen, I said, if you want to protest our Tu B'Shvat Seder with a frum Muslim woman wearing hijab, then go ahead and do so. But you're going to look like complete idiots, and I'm going to phone the Jewish paper and say that you're complete idiots. And they didn't do it. And I just use that because, you know, you're going to have a different Tu B'Shvat Seder, right, if you bring a CSA farmer or an Israeli and a Palestinian. But they're both about, the Torah is a commentary on the world, and the world is a commentary on the Torah. And they're both about being real, and they're both about taking on serious issues. We have so underplayed Jewish tradition in so many ways. We so think that Jewish tradition is about this thing that you do for your kids that you don't quite believe yourself, but it's a nice thing and we should do it. And we've essentially corrupted and diminished our communities by doing that. One of the things that I want to say is that a Tu B'Shvat Seder is no less for you and your families and friends, but you and your peers and not just your kids, than anything else in Jewish life. You should do it so that you will have a great time. And if that is so, then it'll be a great Seder. I want to come down. Somebody tell me this thing. What is all this stuff about 4 worlds? Has anybody, first of all, as I say, if I say Tu B'Shvat Seder and 4 worlds, does that mean anything to anybody? Right, what does it mean?
Yeah, I don't know about that because I'm thinking back. I went to one of the first ones back in the 1970s when Earth Day, and it was a pretty far left one, and it was 4 elements at the time. So I don't know if that's the 4 worlds. And I remember we had to dress either in blue or brown to represent. It was earth, and it was fire, and it was wind and water, I guess. And we had to go to 4 different corners of a room. But beyond that, I can't tell you, and you know, I wasn't already drunk, so I don't know what it was, you know, but I can't recall. So I don't know if that's the 4 worlds, 4 elements. I don't know where that came from either.
So what I want to say is that apparently, Kabbalistically, there are 4 worlds, the worlds of Asiyah, Yetzirah, Bria, and Atzilut, and we've listed them at the top here. One of the things that I want to say is that I personally don't mention this at all at my Tu B'Shvat Seders, or if I do, only tangentially. And the reason I say it is because this is not deeply meaningful to me. I'm not a Kabbalist. The fact that you don't understand this doesn't mean you shouldn't use this in your Tu B'Shvat Seder, but if you do, Go out and really learn about it. We live in a world in which there is a huge amount of material. Go and find a Kabbalist. Go and read a series of books. Go and look at things online, right? Immerse yourselves, like, not forever, not for your whole life, but enough that these concepts make some sense to you. And if they do, then use them. But if they don't, you don't have to. Right? I want us to take a step back into the creativity of what is going on here. I want us to step back to the Kabbalists of Tzfat and Pri Etz Hadar and go back to, like, we know what it's like today when we decide to create something. You sit there online, you find some things, you open a Word document, you shuffle and copy and paste things, and you print them out. Lo and behold, we have a Haggadah. What is it if you are sitting there, right, in Tzfat in the 15th century, and you're saying, psh, let's do, I can't do it without a sort of like a certain version of like Mamish Gewalt, which is a totally different kind of projection backwards. But let's say, you're sitting there and doing it. And I think part of what happened was they said, okay, it's like we've got two poles that we begin with. One is we've got this thing Mishnaically, right? Right, Rosh Hashanah Le'ilanot, that it's the new year for trees. And on the other hand, which we know is on the full moon of Shvat, and we know that 2 months from now, well, 1 month from now, we've basically got Purim, and we're going to drink a lot. And 2 months from now, we've got the full moon of Pesach, and we have 4 cups of wine. Right? And I think something about 4 cups of wine and fruits and eating is more primary even than the 4 worlds. And I think they said, you know what, at the Haggadah of Pesach we have 4 cups of wine. You know what, here we'll have 4 cups of wine. But let's put a different piece of symbolism to it, and it evolves from there. And I think the structure of 4s, to me, does make sense. Right? It makes sense because it maps onto the 4 cups of wine that we have on Seder night, to have 4 cups of wine at Tu B'Shvat. The whole thing that the Kabbalists have done, if you go to the line of symbolic foods, this, by the way, is so pedagogically brilliantly Jewish. They said we've got 4 kinds of foods. What are they? Hard outside and soft inside, soft outside and hard inside, all soft and edible, and what's the 4th one? Right? No food. Right? That's the 4th category. Right? It's not 3. It's like a category of 4. The 4th one is, psh, there's nothing there. It works both in the sense that we have 4 cups of wine, but it also works that it breaks up a Tu B'Shvat Seder naturally into 4 pieces. Indeed, I would argue it breaks it up into anywhere between 2 and 6, right? Because you can treat the first one and the last one of your 4 cups or 4 worlds as being openings and introductions, and the 4th one can be sort of closing. So then you've got 2 things to play with, the 2nd cup and the 3rd cup. Or you can do an opening and a closing outside of these 4, and then you've got 4 worlds. But in each case, in a sense, you've got an ability to break your Tu B'Shvat Seder into elemental pieces. Fundamentally, there should be, in my view, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Right? The beginning is something about introductions. One of the reasons that we did, not everybody was here, but we whizzed around the room, and I just had people say their name and share a highlight of the food conference so far, is that I want to begin in a group, not with my voice, but with people simply being present and introducing themselves, right? But there needs to be some kind of an introduction. There needs to be some kind of a closing. We will do a closing to the session. And in the middle of it, you've got 2 to 4 things to play with. Right? And use that. Going back to the thing that I said at the start about over-cramming these things, right? One of those can be something that you're really learning, a text, a speaker, and so on, right? One of them can be a meal, right? One of it can be chill. One of it can be a song. But you can start to think about what's the rhythm of this. Let's talk about the food that's on the table, going back to what Shimon said earlier on. What foods might you have on your Tu B'Shvat Seder, and why?
My understanding, and I'm sure you and other people can correct me, 7 species that are found throughout Israel: dates,
Yep.
figs,
Yep.
barley,
Yep.
olives,
Yep.
grapes,
Yep.
pomegranates,
Yep. And wheat.
Wheat.
Wheat is the 7th. Well done. What is it saying if we're having those 7 fruits on our Tu B'Shvat Seder? That it's connected to the land of Israel, right? It's saying that it's connected to the land of Israel, right? Now, I think that that is right for any number of reasons. I think it's right because it's where we came from as a people. I think it's right because it's what Tu B'Shvat is about. It's actually, in one sense, not the New Year for trees generally. It's the New Year for trees in Israel, right? We're going to be doing Tu B'Shvat Seders this year. Israel just had its largest forest fire. What were these forest fires about? Not only what were their proximate causes, but what were their deeper causes? What needs to happen? There's a whole bunch of stuff. So that's a really, really good reason to have those Shivat Haminim on the table. What other fruits might we have and why?
Some people want to have apples that they've stored and want to have maybe things that they've kept in the freezer, special, blackberries and wild raspberries.
Symbolism is powerful to the extent that it is real and that it really engages us. I want to point out that in relationship to land, there are at least 3 things contemporaneously going on in being Jewish in the year 2010. One is a connection to the land of Israel. It's there in Tu B'Shvat. It's there in the fact that we pray towards Jerusalem. It's that in the winter we add Mashiv Aroch Amrid Agashim, that the rain should come, right? In the summer, in all sorts of ways we're connected to the land of Israel. That's one thing. Second thing is the wandering Jew, right? Most of us in this country are Ashkenazi, right? And came from Eastern Europe. And there are all of those traditions, and Yiddish, and foods that came from there, and bagels, and chopped liver, and all that kind of stuff. And the third thing is Michael Pollan and Wendell Berry and localism, and the fact that many of us are committed and have started to understand that the sheer velocity of the world isn't always a good thing, and there is a place that we want to connect more deeply to the land that we genuinely come from and are connected to. To the extent that a Tu B'Shvat Seder is real, to the extent that we are celebrating the New Year for trees, I want to raise these things as a question. This is not an answer, but a question. And the fruits that just as the things that you put on a Seder table at Pesach time are there precisely to evoke questions, to prompt questions, right? It's what Manish Tanat is about. I want to do that for real at a Tu B'Shvat Seder. And so what we've done in recent years at our Tu B'Shvat Seder is we've had the Shivat Haminim, and we have had stuff that has been from Israel. I think last year for the first time there was stuff there from Negev Nectars. It has been not just stuff from Israel, but stuff that was from Israel that we really had a connection with. And we've had food that has been native to the Northeast at this time of year. And we've had them both on our table and said, what is this about? And as we've gone through a process of hard outside and soft inside and all that kind of stuff, we've started to think about it and prompt a conversation. You could do your whole Tu B'Shvat Seder on that. Or you can just have it there and make reference and move on. But that's fundamentally my answer to the question that you raised about star fruits. It's not a question of, is it right or wrong that I have this? It's why am I having it here, and understanding it, and understanding and framing what it is that we want to do from that.
I see wanting to have a connection between, local seasonal vegetables at the time, but it is Rosh Hashanah La Ilan. And so, from an aesthetic standpoint, not from a halachic standpoint, if it's a new year to celebrate the trees, and granted some of the 7 species are not tree fruits, but there are, that you can make an argument that there's a wonderful book, Nature and Our Biblical Heritage, which talks about why it's those 7 and why it's miraculous that the seasons follow when they do and so on. But it seems to me that there's a little bit of a disconnect also in having things that aren't tree fruits, just from an aesthetic standpoint. Although I like your idea of a question, is put it there as a question, saying that because I also have a problem about like Shimon's problem of finding all these things out of season so that we can have the magical fruits. The positive side is that a lot of the fruits are dry. And those are seasonal fruits for the winter.
I want to make absolutely clear, right? I'm an English Jew living in New York. The question of what is my homeland, right, and my different sorts of relationships to Israel and New York, to Isabella Friedman, to England, are really complicated. Like they are real questions for me in my life. There's something that Liz and I are thinking about, and the whole issue of relationship to place for Jews, right, is itself a real and genuine and interesting question. And it's one theme that you could take for your Tu B'Shvat Seder, right? There are many, but if you want to go that route, that way lies a really rich and interesting conversation. What I think I'm going to do, I just want to take a couple of minutes to talk about these themes. And what I'm going to do in a second, I'm actually just going to put you in Chavruta, and I'm going to invite you to turn to your neighbor. And I just want you to take a couple of minutes each to take 2 seconds to decide on a particular group, right? Your synagogue, your school, your family, but just take a second to say, okay, this is the particular Tu B'Shvat Seder I'm going to be thinking about, whether you currently are planning to do one there or not. And just take a moment. If I wanted to have a central theme for my Tu B'Shvat Seder, what would it be? Would it be a forest fire in Israel? Would it be relationship to land? Would it be to local food systems, a particular controversy, something in Jewish tradition, Tu B'Shvat in music? Just take a couple of minutes to brainstorm. What comes to mind for you? What might be interesting? A speaker that you might have, a group of people you might reach out to, an organization that you might want to frame. Just turn to your neighbor and each of you take a couple of minutes to brainstorm that, and then we're going to come back together.
So I work on water issues, and one thing we were talking about is I ask a lot of people where their water comes from, and they often don't know. And to understand what watershed you live in, and combining it with a new term that's been evolving called food shed.
Sure. I work at Yale, and we'll do this Tu B'Shvat Seder with students there, and we have a School of Forestry and Environmental Management, so I think what we'll probably do is get a speaker from that school to come in and talk about the forest fire and how, you know, that end is really the beginning of a new life, and, you know, what difference we can make as individuals or as a group, and to produce some action that students can take out of that experience, and to frame the Seder around that.
I'm from New Jersey, which is the Garden State, and South Jersey, and I would like to really explore what we do offer locally. And for our Seders, for our Pesach Seders, we do sort of what you were doing. We take these beige tarps and put them out in clear space, and then sort of like have a low table of hors d'oeuvres, so then the next part of the Seder you can go formally into the dining room. So I'm wondering if maybe the Tu B'Shvat part, we would just sit on the floor, and then the meal part, we would take all these great recipes from Gil Marks and make them and have a great meal. So I'm taking a lot out of here.
There are an infinite number of amazing Tu B'Shvat Seders that we can do, but each of us is a different person in a different place at a different time. Just as we don't want industrial monoculture for our food, we don't want industrial monoculture for our religion and our communities and the tradition itself. We are part of a living, vibrant tradition. And part of what we get to do with Tu B'Shvat is what we do with the whole of the tradition. We inherit wisdom from those who come before it. We learn it with immense respect. And we also take it forward and breathe life into it. A Tu B'Shvat Seder should have some intellectual content to it. It should have some heft. It should have some framing of what Tu B'Shvat is. It should have something that is real in our lives. It should have food and wine. It should bring people together. It should have interaction. But how could we do it without music? Da lecha shekol esev ve'esev yesh lo shira miyuchedet mishelo u'mishirat asavim Na'aseh nigun shel ro'eh. And you know, just like we're ready for slightly more complex and real foods, we're ready for like real music. I just think there is real magic in that song. I really love it. It just carries something very special. Well, I just want to thank everybody. This has been really amazing for me. It's reminded me of how deeply I believe in this and how rich it is. I want to thank the Jim Joseph Foundation who have supported this work and are supporting taking it forwards. We want to ask each of you, let us know what you do. Right, all of these materials are free, the stuff we've given you now, the stuff that you can take, but we want to capture it. Please let us know if you do a Tu B'Shvat Seder or go to it. Please let us know what you did that worked, that you want to send back into the loop for people to learn from in the years to come.